When Eli Turner stepped into the entrance of Grand Teton Ranger Station in April 2021, he was barely recognizable. Barefoot, skeletal thin, with long matted hair and draped in a tattered piece of fabric in place of clothing. The man had gone missing 6 years earlier, along with his 2 climbing partners in one of the most rugged areas of the Teton Range. People everyone believed were dead. But the most terrifying thing was not his appearance. The most terrifying thing was what he recounted about those 6 years, about what had happened to his 2 friends, and about the entity that still lurked in the deep darkness of the Wyoming mountain forest. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On September 6, 2015, the weather at Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming was crystal clear in a way that surprised many rangers. The sky was cloudless, but the air at nearly 9,000 feet carried the characteristic dry, biting chill of early fall. On this day, 3 amateur climbers, Eli Turner, 24, Caleb Ward, 26, and Noah Brenner, 25, began what was planned as a 2-day trip that would later become the largest disappearance case on Middle Teton in nearly a decade. According to the itinerary they left with their families, their goal was the Garnet Canyon route up Middle Teton. But the 3 weren't really focused on just completing the standard climb. The group's real objective, known only to a few close friends, was to veer off the main trail in the lower saddle area to find a rarely used alternate route, rumored to lead to a rare panoramic viewpoint. Eli had spent weeks reading route reports and comments on climbing forums to mark coordinates of potential accessible broken rock sections. Rangers later accurately reconstructed their morning timeline. At 6:58 a.m., the camera at the Lupine Meadows parking lot captured Caleb closing his technical pack, while Eli checked ropes and Noah opened a topographic map. The 3 bought additional water filters and energy bars at the store near Moose Junction at 7:22 a.m. According to the cashier, they looked completely relaxed, showing no signs of stress or hurry, even joking about having to endure the first cold night of the season on the mountain. By 7:40 a.m., they returned to the trailhead, adjusted their gear, and began the climb. Park traffic cameras captured Eli's Jeep Liberty for the last time as it left Moose Junction heading south. After that, all traces of the group were cut off. 3 days of silence passed quickly. Per their schedule, the group was supposed to check in with family on the evening of September 7th. But all 3 phones remained silent. Noah's family began worrying after 7 p.m. when messages went unanswered. At 10:18 p.m., Eli's mother contacted the park dispatch. The official missing persons report was filed at 11:41 p.m. Immediately after the missing persons report was filed, Grand Teton National Park activated Level 2 Search and Rescue (SAR) procedures. The level applied to high-risk cases, but without sufficient data to confirm an immediate life-threatening situation. Internal information systems were switched to priority status. The night SR team was mobilized, and the coordination center at Jenny Lake deployed the first response group to Lupine Meadows trailhead within less than an hour. Based on the registered route of Eli Turner, Caleb Ward, and Noah Brenner, the incident commander established an initial search area consisting of 3 key zones: the main Garnet Canyon Trail corridor, the south face of Middle Teton, and the terrain leading up to Lower Saddle, where the group might have deviated from the standard route. SAR forces used LiDAR elevation maps, satellite imagery, and GPS data from the park's internal traffic monitoring devices to narrow down possible stopping points, tent sites, or places they might have become stuck. By 2:30 a.m., the first tracking team reached the boulder field and noted that a thin layer of snow that had fallen since the previous afternoon had covered most footprints. However, at lower elevations, they found several wind-exposed shoe prints on gravel, matching the common sole pattern of the boots. All 3 were wearing. At dawn, the Teton Helitack helicopter took off to check the west face and rockfall hazard areas, but found no unusual signs. Ground teams pushed deeper into Garnet Canyon, and by noon on the first search day, they found the first item, a climbing glove, lying next to a large boulder, a few hundred meters south of Lower Saddle. The glove matched the color in Noah's gear list, but could not be definitively confirmed due to scratches and ice. About an hour later, another team located what they believed was the missing group's temporary campsite, a flat, wind-sheltered rock platform with a lightweight three-person tent still pitched, but empty. Inside remained a water filter bag, a measuring cup, and several unused energy bars. However, there were no signs of struggle or disorder. Everything appeared neatly arranged as if the group had left intentionally. This prompted the incident commander to expand the search area to terrain branches not mentioned in the registered itinerary, including 2 narrow rock corridors leading to secondary ridges east of Middle Teton, areas where many climbing groups had become confused in bad weather. From midday on the second day, weather conditions changed rapidly. Gusts increased to 40-50 miles per hour on the ridges, thick fog obscured visibility, and renewed snowfall made any new footprints disappear immediately. Meteorological reports sent to command warned of hypothermia risk and wind chill that could put any stranded climber in critical condition within hours. SAR teams calculated that in the first 48-72 hours, survival odds depended on whether the group had found shelter or could still move. Additional units were brought in, including infrared search teams, personnel from Teton County Search and Rescue, and a canine team experienced in broken rock terrain. Still, nighttime thermal flights detected no heat signatures consistent with humans. What was recorded were only small hotspots corresponding to rocks absorbing daytime heat. On the third search day, ground forces expanded the scope to include the entire Moran Range and the area north of Middle Teton, in case the group had veered off due to bad weather. However, all results yielded no clear clues about their location or next direction of travel. Scattered items found, a water bottle cap matching the brand Eli carried, a piece of gear tape fallen next to a rock crevice, were deformed by snow and weather, making positive identification impossible. The end-of-day summary showed that SAR efforts had covered nearly the entire registered climb route, plus adjacent areas they might have accidentally entered, but no signs emerged, indicating the 3 were still in the search zone or had left emergency signals. The command team's conclusion at this stage was that the collected evidence, the empty tent, scattered items, and snow-erased footprints, only confirmed they had reached higher terrain than expected, but gave no indication of which direction they moved after leaving camp. This forced the park to continue searching without a clear investigative trail, and without predicting whether the group had been injured, lost, or were attempting to descend in increasingly severe weather. On the fourth search day, the incident commander decided to expand the SR scope beyond the usual Middle Teton routes, extending into 3 adjacent high-hazard terrain areas. The Teton Glacier ice mass on the north face, steep talus slopes leading to South Fork, and the fractured eastern ridge, where complex terrain could disorient climbers in bad weather. The glacier team was deployed first, using ground-penetrating radar and probing equipment to check wide crevasses, as falling into a crevasse was rated one of the highest-risk scenarios. However, no signs of fabric, gear, or surface ice disturbances suggesting human presence were found. Concurrently, the Talus team swept the extended broken rock system along Garnet Canyon, but continuous fresh snowfall covered the entire surface, rendering visual and thermal searches ineffective. Still, they collected some disjointed physical clues: a torn backpack strap at the base of a steep slope, a gray fabric scrap wedged between 2 boulders, and a metal water bottle cap with scratches consistent with granite impacts. These items were sealed and sent to the analysis center, but after cross-referencing with Eli, Caleb, and Noah's gear lists, no evidence confirmed they belonged to the missing group. Veteran climbers also confirmed the area typically contained many leftover items from other parties over the years, rendering these finds nearly valueless. In the eastern ridge area, SAR forces faced strong gusts and visibility, reduced to just a few meters, forcing them to narrow travel routes and prioritize safety over broad searching. By the end of the 6th day, the comprehensive report from all teams showed no signs of the three individuals, no clear trails, no bloodstains, no newly built shelters, no fire signs, and no sufficiently distinctive personal items to confirm their presence anywhere in the expanded search zone. All PLB emergency signal scans and wave detection systems recorded no signals, reinforcing the possibility that the group carried no activation device or was outside operational range. In the overall evaluation meeting on the seventh day, the ISAR commander concluded that the entire nearly week-long search effort had covered more than 80 square miles of mountain, ice, ridge, and talus terrain, with over 500 helicopter flight hours and 320 ground search hours, yet yielded no credible evidence to determine their direction of travel, final location, or status. Per federal regulations and National Park Service guidelines, when all reasonable search possibilities have been exhausted without results, the ISAR operation must be terminated to avoid continued risk to rescue personnel. Thus, by noon on the eighth day, Grand Teton National Park officially ended active search operations, withdrew personnel and equipment, and issued a final update to the families of the three victims that no additional clues had been found. The case file was transferred to cold case status, long-term archived, and only to be reopened with new information or additional evidence. Involved agencies, including the FBI and Teton County Sheriff, concurred that there was no basis to open a criminal investigation, as all early evidence showed no signs of human interference, criminal activity, or other anomalies beyond accident or disorientation in harsh weather. The final ISAR report emphasized that if the group had fallen into an ice crevasse, been swept by rockfall, or slid down newly formed snow slopes, the chances of recovering bodies as winter approached were extremely low. The file was therefore officially closed, becoming one of the unsolved disappearances in the Tetons Range, maintained only in passive monitoring status for many years afterward. 6 years after the case file was transferred to cold case status, on the afternoon of July 18, 2021, the Teton County Sheriff's Office received an emergency call from a tourist driver running the Jackson-Victor route, reporting a barefoot man in severely exhausted condition, his coat torn and barely retaining any heat, staggering along the side of Highway 22 near Teton Pass and showing signs of disorientation. When the patrol unit arrived at the scene, they found the man in a state of severe hypothermia. His body nothing but skin and bones, both hands and feet displaying purple-black necrotic areas, weak breathing, and the only words he repeatedly uttered were his own name, Eli Turner. The patrol team immediately loaded him into the ambulance, temporarily stabilized his frostbitten extremities, and initiated anti-hypothermia protocols before radioing dispatch that they had very likely located one of the three missing climbers from 6 years earlier. Upon arrival at Jackson Medical Center, the top priority was not to extract a statement, but to confirm his identity, as only after positive identification could law enforcement proceed with any questioning or investigative analysis. Within the first 24 hours, verification procedures were activated at maximum level. His fingerprints were scanned 3 times using 2 independent systems to rule out errors from tissue damage. Although large areas of epidermis had sloughed off due to prolonged cold exposure, the ridge patterns on the midsections of his thumbs and index fingers remained clear enough to match against his 2014 Wyoming driver's license data and old military records. The results showed a 100% exact match. Simultaneously, the hospital's dental department performed full-mouth X-rays and compared them to 2013 dental films from the Idaho Falls Clinic, provided by the family, confirming a 1.8 mm leftward deviation of the incisor structure, a feature unique to the same individual. Additionally, the 6.5 centimeters scar on his right lower back, documented in Eli's prior medical records, was directly compared and confirmed with no discrepancy. The lead investigator immediately assigned Eli an ID code under the standard protocol for surviving long-term missing persons, ensuring all related information was uniformly identified before entering the statement analysis phase. Once identity was conclusively established, the forensic and medical teams jointly conducted an initial physical assessment. Eli was found to be in extreme malnutrition, with body weight reduced to approximately 56% of his 2015 recorded value. Muscle density had dropped to levels typically seen in individuals with prolonged immobility. Both hands showed third-degree frostbite, with some finger joints stiffened, not from trauma, but from prolonged tissue hypoxia. The feet exhibited extensive deep black necrosis, with soft tissue no longer responsive to pain. On the forearms and wrists were evenly spaced circular indentations, 1.5 centimeters apart, suspected to be marks from restraints or some type of fixed cuff. The skin around the ankles displayed faint parallel lines that were difficult to see under normal light, but became clearly visible under 45-degree angled lighting. Experts assessed these as signs of long-term restraint, likely from friction against rope or metal. Eli's breathing was weak, but the lungs showed no signs of acute infection, indicating he had not been kept in persistently damp conditions. However, his vocal cords were swollen and severely hoarse, reaching a degree commonly seen in individuals who have spoken very little for many years. Psychologically, Eli exhibited extreme hypervigilance. He flinched at loud noises, especially metallic door closures. His eyes scanned the room in regular cycles, resembling the habit of someone who had lived in a confined space with a constant threat of observation. His heart rate spiked sharply whenever medical staff inadvertently stood too close to the bed, and when questioned rapidly, he frequently entered a dissociative state for several minutes, unresponsive and staring fixedly at a single point. Nevertheless, when asked short, simple questions, Eli began providing fragmented but consistent memory fragments across repeated checks. He described not having seen the sun for a very long time and experiencing only 2 dim periods of light and dark from artificial sources. The confinement context he recalled suggested a structure, deep underground or at least windowless. He spoke of steady dripping water every night, and metal echoes whenever someone walked overhead. He described his holding space as not much bigger than a storage closet, with a low ceiling, rough walls, and a musty but not constantly wet smell. When asked if it was a rock cave, Eli shook his head, stating the floor wasn't natural stone but some kind of old, uneven concrete. He recalled hearing a fan running steadily, faint vibrations in the walls, and a sound like a generator starting every few hours. These environmental details became critical: intermittent engine noise, plumbing sounds, overhead footsteps, all pointing to an artificial structure, not a mountain cave. Eli also recounted that for many years his daily rhythm was dictated by a food delivered through a slot in the door schedule, suggesting a thick metal door. He remembered the food having a metallic and earthy taste, hinting at poor storage conditions or inconsistent supply. Notably, he mentioned occasionally hearing distant vehicles, not often, but enough for me to know the place wasn't completely isolated. When asked about Caleb and Noah, Eli could not provide clear descriptions, only stating that they were kept somewhere else, and I heard them in the first few months, then no more. Although this information was insufficient for conclusions, it aligned with his emotional state, grief mixed with panic when mentioning them. Based on the entire fragmented account, the investigative team compiled the first usable data list for locating the confinement site. 1. Acoustic features, short-cycle generator noise, overhead metal echoes, steady water drips, occasional distant vehicles. 2. Structural features, small room, rough concrete walls, thick metal door with food slot, low ceiling, non-natural stone floor. 3. Environmental conditions, not continuously damp, suggesting ventilation or dry cold area, not near flowing streams. 4. Activity rhythm, unnatural light-dark cycles, suggesting timed lighting. 5. Bodily evidence, periodic restraint marks, tissue damage, from prolonged immobility, extended frostbite inconsistent with indoor-only confinement, suggesting periodic outdoor exposure or transfer to unheated areas. All data was standardized, and coded into the initial investigative index set, forwarded directly to FBI analytical teams to narrow down types of structures potentially existing within a reasonable travel radius from the Teton Pass area. From that point, Eli's file was no longer treated as a prolonged missing persons case, but officially reclassified as unlawful confinement with clear criminal elements, and the information he provided became the foundation for all subsequent investigative directions. As soon as Eli's hemodynamics stabilized within the first 72 hours, a federal forensic medical team was convened for in-depth evaluation, aiming to determine the extent of cumulative damage over 6 years of disappearance and to distinguish between injuries attributable to natural environment and those only possible under deliberate confinement conditions. The preliminary report noted that Eli's body bore a series of old injuries absent from his 2015 medical records. Ribs 8 and 10 had been fractured, but healed misaligned, with bone tissue indicating fractures occurring at least 3-4 years prior to discovery. The right fibula had a stress fracture that was never properly immobilized. The left knee cartilage showed wear consistent with prolonged restricted movement, followed by sudden uneven loading. Concurrently, there were accumulated cold exposure injuries. Foot skin turned gray-black, not from a single cold event, but from multiple freeze-thaw cycles. The layered necrosis pattern indicated hundreds of hours in sub-physiological cold without reaching lethality. Possible only if the victim was maintained in controlled low temperatures or repeatedly exposed outdoors for short, recurring periods. Forensic physicians asserted that if Eli had survived solely by natural shelter in the mountains, such stratified injuries would be virtually impossible, as a true wilderness survivor would succumb to hypothermia long before developing cyclic necrosis. Around the wrists and ankles were deep, consistent indentations with uniform size and spacing. Unlike the irregular spreading seen in injuries from vines or natural materials, microscopic examination revealed friction traces from synthetic woven material, likely nylon or polypropylene, commonly used in restraints, tie-downs, or security straps. Histology showed these indentations formed and recurred over an extended period, meaning Eli was repeatedly immobilized, not for days but for years. Additionally, abnormal thick caul, using on the back of the ankles rather than the soles, indicated minimal locomotion, primarily standing or sitting in a confined space with short steps and no pressure distribution, typical of mountaineers or outdoor survivors. Hair and nail analysis, key long-term nutritional indicators, revealed severe micronutrient deficiencies. Zinc, iron, and vitamin D levels were at ranges seen only in controlled starvation victims or those fed monotonous low-protein diets over years. Segmented hair samples representing 6-8-month growth periods disclosed repeating nutritional cycles, prolonged severe deficits punctuated by slight improvements, a pattern impossible in natural self-survival, where food availability fluctuates seasonally without stable periodicity, as shown in Eli's hair. This suggested Eli's nutrition was externally controlled, intermittently provided rather than self-foraged. On the shoulders and upper back were evenly spaced round scar patches, about 1 centimeter in diameter, occurring in pairs, consistent with repeated impact from a hard surface or metal frame. Some scars overlapped, proving prolonged maintenance in pressure-bearing postures. Vocal cord evaluation revealed significantly thinned laryngeal tissue and desiccated cords. Evidence of near-total silence for an extended period, consistent with solitary confinement models involving vocal isolation or prohibition of speech. Furthermore, persistently elevated cortisol and adrenaline residues in hair samples indicated chronic, multi-year stress rather than acute reactions. From a forensic perspective, the analysis team constructed a timeline model based on muscle tissue catabolism rates, bone resorption levels, and collagen fiber damage. Results indicated Eli had endured at least 4 or 5 years of extreme movement restriction, low caloric intake, and partially controlled unstable temperature conditions, an environment almost certainly artificial rather than natural. Experts emphasized that a true 6-year wilderness survivor would exhibit specific traits, such as thickened plantar calluses, self-healed environmental scars, or distinctive gut bacteria from natural water sources. In this case, Eli's gut microbiome was narrowed, similar to individuals confined in enclosed spaces with monotonous diets. No typical wilderness parasites were present. His bones lacked mineralization patterns consistent with sunlight exposure. Dangerously low vitamin D levels confirmed the majority of time spent in darkness or under insufficient UV light. When constructing the overall injury model, forensic pathologists proposed 3 theoretical scenarios: 1 survival entirely in the wild for 6 years, 2 intermittent confinement, alternating between natural and artificial environments, 3 complete confinement in a controlled space with restricted movement and environmental exposure. After cross-referencing all biomedical data, the team concluded Scenario 1 was biologically impossible. Scenario 2 would require clear natural environmental traces, which were absent. Scenario 3 matched nearly perfectly across all evidence: layered cold injury patterns, recurring restraint marks, consistent micronutrient deficits, chronic muscle wasting, vocal cord damage, shoulder and wrist scar structures, narrowed gut microbiome, and critically low vitamin D. The final forensic medical report concluded that Eli Turner could not have reached his observed condition without undergoing years of deliberate, tightly controlled confinement involving strict regulation of light, food, movement, and temperature. The bodily evidence not only indicated loss of freedom, but also cyclical management, i.e., the captors kept him alive at minimal levels without allowing death, a pattern commonly seen in prolonged abductions or rigidly scheduled, forced labor cases. The forensic authority explicitly stated in its conclusion, "No natural scenario accounts for the full spectrum of Eli Turner's injuries. This constitutes medical evidence confirming the victim endured years of active, deliberate confinement under strict bodily control, comparable to organized illegal captivity cases." With this conclusion, what was once an unsolved missing persons case was officially determined to involve criminal elements, providing a scientific foundation for the subsequent criminal investigation. When the investigation team began working with Eli Turner in a more stable condition, they realized that most of his memories existed in fragmented pieces without a clear chronological sequence, but containing notable recurring elements, particularly auditory details and spatial sensations. Because Eli had endured prolonged isolation and neurological damage from malnutrition, the forensic psychologists had to employ a microstructured interview method, focusing on sensations rather than asking him to describe events in chronological order. When analyzing the interview segments, the investigation team immediately noticed 3 layers of information that Eli repeatedly mentioned: the sound of water, the sound of metal echoing from above, and cyclical machinery noise. First was the steady dripping of water, not the rush of a stream or large pipes, but distinct separate drops with short reverberation. A forensic acoustician determined that this type of sound best matched condensation or leakage from old metal pipes in an enclosed space, not consistent with the natural conditions of a damp cave where dripping water would produce longer echoes. This reinforced the hypothesis that Eli was held in some form of basement or man-made structure. Second, the metal moving overhead, as Eli described it, indicated a metal surface or load-bearing beam above his confinement space. This led the team to rule out hand-dug bunkers or wooden structures, as those would not produce the sharp ringing echoes Eli described. Footsteps echoing down through metal only occur when there is a steel floor or metal grating overhead, commonly found in warehouses, old agricultural buildings, or abandoned technical facilities. Third, Eli mentioned a machine vibrating in the wall and an engine starting every few hours, matching the sound of a small generator or automatic water pump. Such machines are often installed in isolated infrastructure or off-grid areas, such as agricultural pump stations, technical vaults, or temporary facilities. Based on these 3 auditory layers, the investigation team began reconstructing Eli's spatial memory by simulating acoustics according to his descriptions of reverberation, distance, and repetition patterns. The results indicated a confinement space with a low ceiling, small area, no sound-absorbing surfaces, and most likely located underground or beneath a structure with a metal surface above. Another analysis team categorized the data thematically to identify high-value leads. Type A data, high stability across multiple retellings, included rhythmic water dripping, artificial light cycling on and off, a metal door with a food slot, machinery starting on a repeating schedule, and a cold, dry air feeling like from an old tunnel. Type B data, behavioral descriptions included Eli being taken outside in the dark, forced to walk a few steps, then stop again, and his account that they wouldn't let me sit still for too long in the first months. The analysis team believed these could represent forced relocations used to maintain minimal circulation or to move Eli between holding areas. Type C data, related to other victims, included his recollection that in the early months he heard Caleb and Noah somewhere farther away, but later no longer did. Because this memory appeared consistently across different interviews and neurological states, experts rated its consistency as medium to high, sufficient to support the hypothesis that the initial holding area had multiple spaces or separated chambers. Type D data, vague or unstable descriptions, such as breathing wall or light turning purple, were discarded due to the high likelihood they were products of sensory distortion from malnutrition, prolonged stress, and social isolation. After eliminating details distorted by psychological trauma, the investigation team was left with 9 key leads. 1 enclosed underground space, 2 thick metal door with food slot, 3 short cycle generator or pump noise, 4 dripping water from old metal piping, 5 metal floor or beams overhead, 6 multiple separated rooms or compartments, 7 short. Repetitive forced movements, 8 low but stable temperature not natural, 9 infrastructure near a roadway, because Eli heard distant vehicles. From these 9 data points, the FBI's terrain analysis team began filtering maps within a 20-mile radius of Teton Pass, the area consistent with the travel time Eli could have walked or been released near a road. After cross-referencing with old infrastructure data, they listed 4 plausible facility types, 1 abandoned irrigation technical vaults with extensive metal piping and underground maintenance tunnels, 2 old winter equipment storage facilities on farms, often using steel floors and generators, 3 avalanche storage bunkers built 1970-1990, with concrete construction, basic ventilation, and thick metal doors, 4 small closed mining operations, though most were far from Teton Pass. Some illegal sites could still exist. The hypothesis list was then narrowed based on 2 criteria: locations allowing covert operation without inspection, and locations capable of temporary power via generator. Initial analysis identified about 11 potential sites meeting 6 to 8 criteria, forming the foundation for subsequent field investigation steps. Thus, reconstructing Eli's memories not only helped the team understand the perpetrator's operational pattern, long-term confinement, activity control, maintenance of light, food cycles, preventing victim death, but also created the first set of criteria for narrowing down the holding location, marking the case's shift from forensic analysis to spatially oriented investigation. Immediately after the FBI analysis team completed the initial set of criteria for the confinement space characteristics based on Eli Turner's reconstructed memories, the FBI Wyoming field office officially took over the case on July 26, 2021, transferring the file from Teton County Sheriff and National Park Service jurisdiction to federal investigation under the classifications kidnapping and unlawful detention, as the victim was confirmed held beyond 48 hours and likely transported across federal jurisdictional boundaries. The takeover process included a full review of all physical evidence collected in 2015, reconstruction of a detailed hour-by-hour timeline of the disappearance based on trailhead cameras, hiker statements, weather data, and climbing route registration logs. The FBI's event analysis team first rebuilt the most accurate possible timeline for September 6, 2015. The last day the three climbers were seen alive, 6:58 a.m. leaving the parking lot, 7:40 a.m. beginning ascent of Garnett Canyon, approximately 11:45 a.m. seen below Lower Saddle, 3:40 p.m. weather deteriorating, and complete loss of contact thereafter. To assess environmental impact, the forensic meteorology team incorporated historical weather data models, including wind speed, cloud cover, pressure, temperature fluctuations, and snowfall amounts in the 72 hours after disappearance. The goal was not to pinpoint where they met misfortune, but to determine whether an abductor could have accessed the area under those weather conditions. Results showed that despite harsh conditions, someone familiar with the terrain or having nearby shelter could still approach and move faster than individuals lost in an early season blizzard. These analyses were critical because they established that if an abduction occurred, it could not have been impulsive, but must have involved someone knowledgeable about the terrain, skilled at moving in bad conditions, or possessing a secret nearby shelter structure. Once the timeline was rebuilt, the FBI cross-referenced it with environmental data and infrastructure maps of Teton Pass and Bridger, Teton National Forest, screening sites previously recorded as having technical vaults, equipment bunkers, avalanche shelters, or old agricultural facilities. The FBI Denver Underground Structures team added archived data from the 1960s, 1990s, when the Tetons had networks of maintenance tunnels for roads, old pump stations, and private facilities now disused but partially extant underground. The initial list included 43 locations, potentially containing underground bunkers within a 20-mile radius of where Eli was found. After eliminating sites already filled in or confirmed long unused by rangers, the list narrowed to 19 sites, each with one or more features matching Eli's description: rough concrete base, potential small rooms, generator noise, old metal water pipes, or sufficient isolation for undetected confinement. Meanwhile, the FBI Legal Division standardized the case classification under federal law because the victim was held over 6 years with clear evidence of removal from the initial disappearance site. The case was formally recorded under 18 U.S. Code Section 1201, kidnapping, allowing FBI expansion beyond state lines, while adding unlawful detention and aggravated assault based on forensic injuries. The elevation to federal status granted the team access to property records, abandoned infrastructure files, operational data from old technical stations, and the authority to request records from local land agencies and federal resource management. To strengthen the legal foundation, the FBI created a cross-reference table between disappearance time environmental data and Eli's described confinement conditions: low but non-freezing temperature, cyclical machinery noise, no sunlight, dry air, and distant vehicle sounds. Experts concluded the holding site was likely both isolated and not too far from a roadway, with auxiliary power, old piping, sub-level or technical compartment. From these criteria, they built a 12-condition analysis filter. When applied to the map, only 7 sites met most criteria. This marked a turning point in the investigation as, for the first time since 2015, the case moved beyond speculation to a concrete approach. To ensure information continuity, FBI Wyoming coordinated with Jackson Police Department and National Park Service to form a joint steering group maintaining consistency between old SAR data and new criminal data. Investigators were assigned to 3 main thrusts. 1. Re-evaluate the initial disappearance area through a criminological lens. 2. Survey underground infrastructure and abandoned structures within the defined radius. 3. Build a behavioral profile of the captor based on the long-term confinement pattern. All 2015 SAR documents were redigitized to check for overlooked clues such as an empty tent found, scattered items, or snow-covered footprints to reinterpret them under a criminal perspective for potential new meaning. Once the full legal foundation was established and the suspect site list identified, the case file was officially classified as high priority activating full federal investigation protocols. This was the first time in the history of disappearances in the Teton Range that a case was upgraded from missing due to nature to kidnapping and prolonged detention, opening an entirely new investigative direction for the next phase. To narrow the 7 suspect sites established after FBI takeover, the Federal Terrain Analysis Team deployed advanced technical tools, including high-resolution LiDAR, multi-layer GIS systems, and over 40 years of historical terrain data to detect any signs of underground structures, voids, or artificial subsurface interference undetectable by naked eye or standard satellite imagery. First, the USGS technical team collaborated with the FBI to reprocess all civilian LiDAR data collected 2012-2020 in the Teton Pass, Granite Creek, Moran area, focusing especially on identifying microstructural anomalies such as asymmetric subsidence, micro-deformations of topsoil, linear unnatural cracks, and surface elevation changes inconsistent with natural freeze-thaw cycles. In the first data layer analysis, the team found that most of the 7 suspect sites showed no clear recent human intervention. However, the northeast Moran area displayed several notable anomalies: a roughly 140-meter wide band with gentle sinusoidal subsidence, inconsistent with normal geology and not matching natural landslide activity. A terrain analysis algorithm was applied to exclude deformations caused by melt, post-heavy snow topsoil shift, or large animal movement like elk. Results showed this surface distortion sequence had multi-year stability and did not migrate with seasonal winds or water flow. Rated by the technical team as a strong indicator of underlying void structure or buried metal piping system. The second analysis layer used multi-temporal GIS data, overlaying 2014, 2016, and 2019 satellite imagery to assess vegetation changes. An area obscured by a pine stand north of Moran showed a continuous strip of vegetation with reduced chlorophyll density, appearing in satellite spectra as a stress vegetation zone, commonly associated with subsurface concrete or metal foundations hindering deep root growth. Notably, this anomalous strip closely aligned with the LiDAR-detected subsidence area. In parallel with spatial analysis, the FBI Gemba Acoustics Specialist Team reconstructed sound propagation models based on Eli's memories, metal footsteps echoing downward, steady water dripping, and machinery starting on a 1-3-hour cycle. They simulated sound transmission from various underground structure types, concrete technical vaults, agricultural equipment chambers, or old water pump facilities, and calculated corresponding echo ranges when placed in Moran's characteristic steep terrain. The acoustic model showed that cyclical machinery noise like Eli described could only be heard underground if the source was no more than 15-30 meters from the holding room and separated by 2 wall layers. A condition matching technical vaults built in the 1970s for wildfire pump systems still scattered in the area. Based on this, the team cross-checked federal infrastructure maps and old pump station records. They discovered that northeast Moran once had a wildfire control water pump facility built in 1978 and officially decommissioned in 1996. But never fully dismantled, only the upper level sealed. Although records showed it locked and sealed, no agency had confirmed the subsurface condition because its technical documentation was lost during the early 2000s and management transfer from Forest Service to National Park Service. The analysis team placed this facility at the top of the suspect list, but to avoid intuitive bias, they continued running multi-temporal deformation modeling from LiDAR. Plotting subsidence curves across 2014, 2017, and 2020 measurements revealed uneven linear subsidence exhibiting a tunnel collapse pattern, typical when a large void or degrading underground chamber exists below. This reinforced the hypothesis that the underlying technical vault still existed and might even remain in use. The GIS analysis team further applied surface classification algorithms to scan for faint secondary trails or unofficial paths hard to detect by satellite. A very faint trail sequence, about 300 meters long, led from an old service road directly into the subsidence area, indicating possible periodic human movement in the area unrecorded in park logs. This data perfectly matched Eli's memory of occasionally hearing very distant vehicles and being taken outside in the dark a few steps, then stopped again. Investigators concluded that if Eli was briefly brought outside to adjust body temperature or relocate, this faint trail could be the captor's secondary exit. Synthesizing all data, terrain deformation, vegetation anomalies, sound propagation models, infrastructure history, and unofficial trails, the GIS team produced a suspicion-level evaluation map with the highest score falling on a roughly 1.8-square-mile triangular area. Northeast of Morin, accessible via an old service road that once served as a fuel transport route for the 1978 pump facility. This was the only area meeting more than 10 of the FBI's criteria: potential underground structure, old metal pipes, overhead metal ceiling, cyclical machinery noise potential, near a major road yet sufficiently isolated, anomalous subsidence pattern, and trail evidence. The terrain investigation team concluded this was the highest probability and most suspicious region likely containing the holding bunker or misused facility. This conclusion immediately became the foundation for the field investigation team to plan a scientific approach, marking the first time since the start of the federal investigation that a specific location was identified through technical methods rather than conjecture. When the high-probability underground active structure was identified in the northeastern suspicious area of Morin, the FBI coordinated with the National Park Service field team to deploy a small-scale on-site survey to avoid drawing attention and to minimize disturbance of evidence. At dawn, on August 2, 2021, the covert approach team entered the area via an old service road discovered during GIS analysis. They followed a faint trail running through the pine forest to the point where LiDAR data indicated the strongest subsidence. Initially, the area appeared completely natural, just sparse grass and a thick layer of pine needles, but upon careful scanning with cavity detection equipment, the technical team detected a subsurface void signal approximately 1.3 meters below the surface. Probing with a rod revealed a distinct metallic echo at one point. Gently clearing the dry leaves to observe revealed a rectangular hatch structure, approximately 1.2 coarse, 2 meters, covered with carefully camouflaged rotting wooden planks, disguised with moss and tree bark glued using homemade pine resin. The upper wooden layer was designed to resemble a fallen tree stump, making it difficult for passers-by to recognize as a hatch cover. Close inspection revealed a rusted metal hinge slot, confirming it was a man-made entrance rather than a natural cavity. After photographing the entire structure in its original state, the technical team pried open the hatch using a specialized crowbar. The hatch sprang up with a metallic squeal from the old hinges, exposing a dark shaft descending via a rusted steel staircase. The air rising from the shaft carried a musty, moldy smell mixed with a faint odor of old machine oil. The field team conducted gas measurements to ensure safety, then descended single file. The staircase led into a narrow corridor with rough concrete walls and a low ceiling under 2 meters, matching Eli's description. The concrete floor was cracked with water stains but no pooling. This aligned with the condensation phenomenon Eli reported during his captivity. The first room was about 3x4 meters, arranged as a makeshift holding cell, a thin torn mattress on the floor, scraps of old blankets, and a steel chain over 1 meter long fixed to a wall hook. Next to the chain was a metal shackle, retaining traces of skin and fabric residue, which was immediately sealed for testing. On the wall, the technical team observed repeated horizontal scuff marks at a height of about 40-60 cm, precisely where a shackled or wall-leaning person would unconsciously rub. In the corner of the room, a small rectangular steel slot about 10 centimeters wide had been cut from the outside inward, most likely the food passage slot Eli described. The inner metal surface showed rust, but the lower edge still held fragments of old decomposed dry food. All contact points were sampled using sterile cotton swabs. The examination team proceeded deeper to the second area via a narrower, slightly sloping corridor. The second room was larger, with 2 mattresses placed apart, chains at opposite corners, and similar wall scuff marks as the previous room. A makeshift wooden frame stood against the wall, marked with short notches like time tallies, grouped in clusters of 3 or 4. In the corner was a metal bucket containing residue, identified as used for water or waste. The forensic team collected all fabric fibers, hair, epidermal fragments, and biological traces around the wooden frame. Subsequent rooms were smaller, some containing only plastic containers and restraints, indicating the bunker had been divided into multiple functional zones, possibly for rotating detention of 3 individuals or for transferring them between rooms. Ceiling metal pipes ran along the length, and light tapping produced echoing sound similar to Eli's description. Another area showed dried grease buildup around large hinges, indicating frequent opening and closing of a metal door. The entire bunker was photographed from multiple angles, with items numbered and collected according to evidence protocol. A significant additional find was at the end of the corridor leading to the utility area, an old gasoline-powered generator, still with its original casing and connections. Though inactive, the muffler showed years of use. Nearby was a rusted metal water pipe leading to the surface. The lower section had a small leak, dripping every few seconds, creating the exact sound Eli remembered. DNA sample collection occurred simultaneously during scene documentation. Forensic samples were taken from chains, shackles, mattresses, concrete floor, and especially from the edges of the food slot. Hair samples found in the second room included 3 different types. 2 matched the light brown and dark brown described by Caleb's and Noah's families previously. After transferring all samples to the Cheyenne lab, DNA results returned within 48 hours, confirming the presence of all 3 victims. Eli's DNA appeared in most rooms, Caleb's on 1 mattress and in the second room shackle, and Noah's on restraints and hair in the third room. This conclusively established that the underground bunker was not only Eli's place of captivity, but had also held Caleb and Noah simultaneously or sequentially. To establish the timeline of bunker usage, forensics examined dust layers, metal oxidation levels, and fabric degradation. Fabric fibers from the mattress showed degradation consistent with 5-7 years. Fresh rust on door hinges indicated continued opening-closing at least into early 2021. And layered rust on chains showed multiple usage phases. Additionally, mold spore samples from walls were analyzed via growth ring counting, indicating minimal ventilation was maintained for years, meaning the bunker had not been abandoned. Compiled field data indicated a small-scale but continuously and deliberately used underground facility over an extended period, sufficient to confirm it had been a long-term human holding site maintained by human hands for many consecutive years, consistent with all prior evidence from Eli Turner's testimony and medical forensic findings. Once the entire underground bunker was fully documented and all evidentiary items collected, the FBI's behavioral analysis team began evaluating the operational characteristics of the space to construct a behavioral model of the individual who used the facility over many years. Based on the bunker's layout, room divisions, floor and wall wear levels, chain traces, and old items, they determined this was not a temporary or impulsive holding site, but a long-term, highly controlled detention model. First, the existence of multiple small rooms, each with distinct occupancy traces, indicated deliberate victim separation to prevent interaction or cooperation. This aligned with wall scuff patterns, chain wear, and individual DNA distribution. Eli appeared in the most rooms, while Caleb and Noah were confined to separate rooms, implying isolation in distinct phases. Such separation reflected sophisticated control psychology. Individual isolation reduces collective resistance and increases victim dependence on the captor. Next, the team used surface wear data to infer forced activity cycles. Low horizontal scuffs near the floor appeared regularly along fixed axes, indicating shackled individuals moved repeatedly within limited ranges in repetitive patterns. This was inconsistent with free movement in confined space and consistent with enforced walking or standing cycles, common in prolonged mild punishment models. In the second room with 2 mattresses and opposite corner chains, investigators noted greater wear on the right side chain than the left, suggesting preferential use of one fixed position. Meanwhile, floor wear along the sloping corridor between rooms indicated regular movement, meaning food or water delivery occurred on a fixed schedule rather than randomly. In the utility area vicinity, residual lubricant on the generator handle showed the captor had basic mechanical skills and knew how to maintain minimal underground functionality without external detection. This matched profiles of individuals accustomed to isolated living with repair maintenance capabilities for old equipment. Additionally, the bunker's location, deep in thick forest cover, far from hiking trails, but near an old service road, demonstrated detailed knowledge of Tetons terrain and historical infrastructure. Not everyone knows about the 1978 water pump facility, nor could easily locate its naturally obscured entrance after years. Maintaining stable, undetected operation over a long period indicated high vigilance and awareness of exposure risks. Analysis of left-behind items, steel chains, old metal locks, worn mattresses, and notched wooden frames led the behavioral team to conclude the captor not only sustained victims' lives, but imposed punishment and behavioral control systems, possibly via altered food, light, or temperature cycles. Eli's cold-induced necrosis patterns combined with the unheated bunker structure suggested cold exposure as a disciplinary tool, moving victims to corridors or near the entrance where temperatures dropped lowest for control. Multiple layered rust deposits on hinges and chains indicated distinct cyclic usage phases, consistent with long-term rather than short-term detention. From these characteristics, the FBI drafted an initial suspect profile, one deep knowledge of Tetons terrain and old underground structures, 2 survival experience and capacity for prolonged isolated living, 3 basic skills in construction, repair, or maintenance of old equipment like generators and plumbing, 4 ability to enforce and schedule forced victim routines, 5 high vigilance, skilled at camouflaging entrances and minimizing external traces, 6 tendency toward structured spatial organization, victim separation, functional room division rather than impulsive action, 7 ability to maintain harsh conditions for punishment without causing death, 8 likely solo operation, as no evidence of multiple individuals was found in the bunker. These criteria formed the foundation for identifying the type of subject capable of running a prolonged detention model in harsh terrain, guiding suspect screening in the next investigative phase. Based on all data from Eli Turner's testimony, bunker traces, and physical evidence analysis, the investigative team reconstructed a 6-year timeline of the captivity period. Beginning the night of September 6, 2015, the date the 3 climbers lost contact. Using DNA from all 3 across different rooms and remaining item positions, forensics determined Eli, Caleb, and Noah were all captured the same night they vanished, most likely after 3:40 p.m. when worsening weather caused disorientation and increased vulnerability. Traces of all 3 appearing simultaneously in the second room proved that initially the group was held together before separation. Wall scuffs and chain positions in the shared room reflected movement restriction from the earliest days or weeks, not after a period of natural survival. From late 2015 to mid-2016, based on Eli's account of hearing them at first then nothing, the timeline places group separation no later than spring 2016. Caleb's and Noah's DNA in separate rooms, along with chain wear in each, indicated each was moved to isolated confinement and held fully independently. This separation behavior matched the captor's control model, isolation to reduce unity and prevent communication or escape cooperation. 2016-2018 was the period of changing detention conditions and most severe injuries. Eli's healed misaligned bone fractures, dated to 3-4 years before discovery, aligned with the 2016-2018 captivity cycle. Layered scarring on wrists and ankles indicated tight, continuous restraint during this phase. Rust layers on chains and hinges in the second room showed heaviest use here, likely where Caleb or Noah was held long-term, before an abrupt change in late 2017 or early 2018, evidenced by a fresh overlying rust layer. These changes coincided with Eli's fragmented recall of hearing them in the early months, then no more, suggesting a major event in 2016-2018 that reduced or ended Caleb's and Noah's presence in the detention space. For bunker equipment and environment, generator and pipe maintenance traces showed upkeep at least through 2018, with dried grease on the generator in 2 layers, the newer dated to about 2-3 years old. This meant stable operation during this period, maintaining controlled light, dark and low temperature cycles. 2019-2021 was Eli's prolonged debilitation phase. This was clearest in hair nutritional cycle analysis, showing steady micronutrient deficiency without recovery periods typical of relaxed captivity. Floor scuffs in Eli's personal room showed progressively restricted movement range, possibly from tighter restraints or captor-imposed spatial limits to sustained physical decline. Layered cold necrosis on extremities was dated to late 2019, early 2021, meaning forced exposure to damaging but non-lethal cold. This period also showed reduced generator operation, exhaust residue in the machine room markedly decreased, suggesting the captor began scaling back infrastructure maintenance or shifting to simpler detention methods. Eli's escape point was established from the broken lock condition in his holding room. The third room door hinges, presumed his longest-held location, had fresh cracks with rust not yet spread, indicating prying or pulling misalignment occurred only months before discovery. The break resulted not from external force, but from years of corrosion combined with repeated small pulls by the victim over time. Correlating with Eli's physical state, emaciated but retaining some leg muscle, the team concluded he spent many months applying steady small force to weaken the hinges. Another key factor was the leaking water pipe near the utility area. Fresh water stains indicated increased leakage in early 2021, likely wetting the hinges, accelerating corrosion, and creating Eli's escape opportunity. Combining all evidence, the 2015-2021 timeline divides into 5 phases. 1 late 2015, capture of all 3, placement in shared bunker. 2 2016, group separation, intensified control. 3 2016-2018, heavy injury phase and events involving the other 2 victims. 4 2019-2021, complete debilitation. Reduced infrastructure maintenance. 5 early 2021, Eli breaks hinges and escapes. While this timeline cannot capture every detail, it provides a unified picture of 6 years of captivity, allowing the investigative team to focus on periods of active bunker operation and potential remaining leads in the surrounding area. From the DNA samples obtained in the underground bunker, particularly at the hinge area of the third room door, the inner side of the restraint ropes, and the handle of the tool chest in the technical room, the federal laboratory recorded the repeated appearance of a genetic profile that did not belong to any of the victims. When the DNA sequence was cross-referenced with the CODIS database, strong matching indicators appeared with the profile of an individual named Silas Hemlock, born in 1979, who had fingerprints and a DNA sample on file from a disorderly conduct incident in a national park in 2003, at which time he was a member of the trail maintenance crew in the Grand Teton area. Federal records show that Hemlock lived in Wyoming for many years, with extensive knowledge of terrain, techniques for building wooden and stone structures, long-term wilderness survival skills, and particular familiarity with areas rarely accessed by visitors. After 2008, Hemlock left his job and gradually disappeared from all administrative records. No registered address, no financial records, No use of registered phones or vehicles. Rare witnesses described him as having shifted to an off-grid lifestyle, often residing in abandoned cabins or self-built wooden shelters deep in the forest. When comparing Hemlock's background and behavioral patterns with the psychological, environmental profile derived from the underground bunker, the level of compatibility was extremely high. The perpetrator had thorough knowledge of the terrain, the ability to transport heavy materials and maintain an underground structure for years, knew how to conceal all access traces, and organized long-term confinement without leaving traceable electricity, water, waste samples. Additionally, signs of victim separation, maintenance of forced activity cycles, and application of controlled punishment regimes aligned with the behavioral control patterns of someone with a history of living apart from society and holding extreme views on personal order. Data extracted from surface analysis of the bunker further showed woodworking and stone mortar techniques matching exactly the construction methods used by the Teton Trail crew before 2005, the period when Hemlock was still employed. Hairs found on an old blanket in the technical room after micromineral analysis and keratin structure comparison also matched the hair profile archived from Hemlock in 2003. The convergence of DNA, technical indicators, occupational history, and behavioral patterns elevated Silas Hemlock to the suspect with the highest probability match across the entire list. After cross-referencing all perpetrator identification criteria established in the prior phase, including the ability to move covertly, sustain resources deep in the forest, understanding of victim separation mechanisms, and capacity to manipulate confined spaces, the FBI Wyoming officially designated Hemlock as a high-priority investigation target, opened a dedicated file, and collected all records related to his travel periods, temporary residences, witnesses who had encountered or been threatened by him, thereby establishing a direct investigative line to determine Silas Hemlock's current whereabouts and his degree of involvement in the 6-year confinement of the 3 amateur mountaineers. Once Silas Hemlock was identified as the high-priority target, the FBI executed expanded search warrants across the entire area where he had lived off-grid, focusing on a wooden cabin hidden deep in the forest east of Morin, believed to be his most frequent retreat based on boot prints, ash remnants, and prior detections recorded by wildlife trail cameras from 2014-2019. This cabin had no direct trail leading to it. The investigative team took more than 2 hours to traverse dense terrain before reaching it, which matched Hemlock's prolonged reclusive lifestyle pattern. Inside the cabin, they discovered a minimalist ground floor space, clearly used for preparation and surveillance rather than living on the table, was a large-scale topographic map of Grand Teton National Park and Bridger Teton National Forest, marked with different ink layers representing travel routes, bunker locations, observation points, and ranger patrol checkpoints. Several symbols matched precisely the location where Eli described hearing strong flowing water sounds, and notably, there was a double circle symbol exactly at the position of the underground bunker discovered the previous week. Near the map, investigators recovered 3 thick handwritten notebooks, preserved in sealed nylon bags. The notebook pages did not record dates directly, but marked seasons, weather cycles, and descriptions of the appearance of 3 subjects, with symbolic notations that, when cross-referenced with the 2015-2021 disappearance timeline, matched with startling accuracy. One note described first cold night, 3 people, middle direction, easier access than expected, which aligned perfectly with the timing of the 3 mountaineers' disappearance. Other pages described first November snowfall, footsteps growing fainter, distance between the 3 must be maintained, all corresponding exactly to the group separation phase that Eli recalled during memory recovery sessions. In the cabin, a metal container was found holding personal items of the victims, a cut section of windbreaker belonging to Caleb, a hair tie with DNA matching Noah's sample, and a folding knife pouch brand, confirmed by the family as Eli's, missing since 2015. Each item was preserved in coarse cloth bags, not due to neglect over time, but showing signs of intentional storage. In the rear section of the cabin, investigators discovered a systematically arranged tool storage area. Rock drilling hammers, compact folding shovels, stainless steel chain segments sized for human wrists, old metal locks, worn rope, along with numerous wooden and metal components matching the bunker's structure. Some tools, such as the hard-blade rock hammer, retained residues of mortar and soil mixtures with characteristics identical to soil samples from the bunker. Boot prints in the cabin showed size and wear patterns matching those found near the bunker entrance, though time and environment had faded many details. DNA samples taken from tool handles, wooden crate surfaces, bucket handles, and the inside of old gloves all matched Silas Hemlock's DNA profile, establishing his frequent and prolonged presence there. Particularly in one corner of the cabin, a vertical wooden board held small pin notes arranged as a tracking calendar, describing time symbols each time Subject A, Subject B, or Subject C had to change rooms, replace restraints, or undergo an adjustment phase. When cross-referenced with the timeline built from bunker traces and Eli's injury condition, every checkpoint matched near perfectly, proving Hemlock had monitored, recorded, and maintained an organized victim control system over many years. Additionally, in a loosely locked wooden chest, investigators found a sketch closely resembling the bunker diagram, with the entrance section numbered and camouflage layer symbols changed by year. These changes aligned with surface deformations recorded via LiDAR, proving Hemlock had continuously repaired and reinforced the bunker. Another critical piece of evidence was 3 blood-stained hand wraps, 2 of which matched Caleb and Noah through dried blood, confirming their presence at the cabin, not randomly, but as a transit point before or after being taken to the bunker. All evidence from journals, maps, tools, DNA, to victims' personal items formed a unified legal chain implicating Hemlock. He surveilled the victims prior to abduction, had direct contact with them, collected their belongings, built and maintained the confinement bunker, and developed a years-long behavioral monitoring system. When investigators completed the comparison between the cabin journals and the disappearance timeline, every event milestone from the night the 3 vanished, the first separation phase, Eli's severe injury period, to the unusual cold cycle Eli described, matched Hemlock's records perfectly, turning the cabin into the pivotal point that shifted the suspect from high probability to near certain perpetrator. Immediately after the cabin search results were compiled and a federal arrest warrant was approved, the pursuit team approached the area, only to find that Silas Hemlock had already disappeared from his regular residence, leaving signs indicating he had left the cabin just hours before the tactical team arrived. Fresh footprints on dry leaves and the dry stream bed in front of the cabin confirmed Hemlock had headed northeast, moving deep into the Grand Teton forest, where the terrain consisted of rocky slopes, seasonally raging streams, and old-growth forest sections nearly impossible to observe from afar. The pursuit team immediately deployed a tracking plan combining low-altitude propeller aircraft, infrared equipment, and ground patrol units divided into 3 prongs to seal off plausible escape routes. In the first 12 hours, Hemlock continuously broke trail by traveling along stream beds, using wet rocks to avoid leaving boot prints, and slipping through dense forest sections to hinder aerial reconnaissance. However, the pursuit team detected a series of indirect signs: dislodged moss on rocks, freshly broken dry branches, and a small pile of still warm ashes near the entrance to a narrow mountain crevice. By hour 20, the southern pursuit prong observed Hemlock moving toward the slope leading to Lee Canyon Valley, an area with many dead-end cliffs, significantly narrowing escape possibilities. An emergency containment line was established with a 3-mile radius, and checkpoints were placed along the 3 stream forks Hemlock would be forced to cross if continuing. By hour 30, an infrared device detected a faint but clear heat signature behind a cluster of wind-fallen pines from the previous season's storm. The pursuit team approached under limited visibility at dusk, moving silently in a pincer formation on both flanks. At 40 meters, they spotted Hemlock attempting to cross a loose rock slope to reach the last remaining escape route toward the sub-range near Paintbrush Divide. A verbal stop command was broadcast over a short-range speaker, but Hemlock continued moving, attempting to use the darkness for cover. The pursuit team was forced to employ dazzler light suppression combined with high-speed approach. After 36 hours from the start of the operation, Hemlock was fully surrounded at a dead-end rock outcrop, with a sheer cliff ahead and the tactical team closing in from behind. With no escape route left, Hemlock was subdued quickly without casualties to the pursuit force. Double security cuffs were applied due to the suspect's history of good physical health and strong resistance potential. He was then escorted on foot to the ranger station near Lee Lake, transferred to an FBI transport helicopter, and flown directly to Jackson, Wyoming, where the arrest warrant had been prepared, officially concluding the longest and most complex pursuit phase of the entire case. Immediately after being escorted to Jackson, Wyoming, Silas Hemlock was placed in federal interrogation pursuant to the protocol for suspects involved in serious violent crimes and extended detention. In the presence of investigators and federal prosecutors, Hemlock maintained silence during the initial phase, merely observing the case files and evidence placed on the table, but when his own DNA sample was directly compared to items found in the bunker and cabin, particularly the gloves, annotated maps, and hair strands attached to the binding ropes, he began to react. He did not deny the evidence, but repeatedly asserted that those places belonged to no one, and that others had trespassed on their own and were held because they failed to understand the rules of this land. When investigators presented the timeline matching the cabin logbook with Eli's injury conditions, Hemlock became visibly tense, spoke disjointedly, and reiterated that no one has the right to enter the area he has protected from before, implying the victim's intervention constituted trespass. These responses led to a formal request for a psychiatric evaluation. The assigned expert panel conducted the assessment over multiple days, employing clinical interviews, cognitive testing, and behavioral history analysis spanning more than 15 years. The report indicated clear manifestations of systematized paranoid disorder, centered on themes of territory, personal order, and the belief that he had been assigned the duty to protect the mountainous forest region from any intrusion. In addition, obsessive-compulsive features related to control of enclosed spaces were noted, evidenced by the highly regimented compartmentalization of the bunker, repeated control cycles, and detailed seasonal record-keeping over many years. Nevertheless, the evaluation panel determined that Hemlock did not suffer from a loss of reality testing or complete loss of behavioral control. He fully understood the legal consequences, knew how to conceal, evade authorities, select escape timing, and actively manage traces. These factors confirmed his competence to stand trial, despite the presence of a mental disorder affecting his belief system. When assessing motive, experts concluded that Hemlock's behavior did not stem from a desire to kill or exact personal revenge, but from a three-pillar motivational model: control, isolation, and territorial possession. The abduction of the three mountaineers occurred on the very night they approached the area Hemlock regarded as the uncrossable boundary, consistent with his territorial paranoia. The initial phase of separating the group in the first year and maintaining prolonged detention over multiple years reflected a continuous need to control individuals within the confined space he had established, while the punishment cycles involving cold exposure and restricted movement demonstrated the goal of rendering the victims completely dependent on him. In numerous interrogation sessions, Hemlock did not deny having detained the victims, but only asserted that they had to stay until they learned to respect boundaries, a statement aligning precisely with the psychological evaluation findings. These conclusions enabled the federal prosecution to construct an indictment supported by a comprehensive evidentiary framework. Hemlock possessed capacity to distinguish right from wrong, exhibited clear motive, and carried out calculated, prolonged conduct. Fully meeting the criteria for prosecution on federal kidnapping charges, prolonged unlawful detention, infliction of serious physical and mental harm, along with additional counts based on recovered evidence. Upon completion of the psychiatric evaluation and the full interrogation results, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Wyoming formally initiated prosecution proceedings against Silas Hemlock on 3 primary counts: 1 federal kidnapping, 2 prolonged unlawful detention causing serious bodily injury, 3 infliction of serious bodily injury during the commission of an organized crime. The legal team devoted several weeks to constructing the indictment, organizing the case file in strict legal sequence, beginning with identification evidence of the subject, followed by proof of Hemlock's presence at the bunker and cabin, then interpretations from pathology, forensics, and behavioral analysis to establish intent to prolong and absolute control. During preparation, prosecutors scrutinized every line of data to ensure all 3 counts were robustly supported, even when considered separately or when the defense attempted to exploit weaknesses in portions of the record. The indictment file carefully avoided redundant evidence repetition, instead focusing on the tightness of the argumentative chain, Hemlock's presence in the bunker and cabin area, his DNA matching multiple locations, the tracking logbook corresponding to the 6-year timeline, medical and forensic findings confirming victims could not have self-inflicted injuries or sustained life under those conditions independently, and the entire structural design of the facility, demonstrating deliberate construction for long-term human confinement. The federal trial opened in August 2021 in Cheyenne, Wyoming, with a 12-member jury selected through rigorous voir dire to eliminate any bias related to mountaineering wilderness living or negative emotions concerning prior missing persons cases in national parks. In the opening statement, the prosecutor presented the timeline from 2015 through Eli's escape in 2021, asserting that the entire process was not an accident, getting lost, or environmental impact, but an organized detention system maintained by Hemlock for 6 continuous years. The prosecution avoided graphic detail of injuries to prevent distressing the jury, but emphasized that every trace pointed to a single source: a human-created environment, with Hemlock as the only individual appearing throughout the evidence. As evidence presentation began, forensic pathologists testified first, explaining the correlation between Eli's long-term injuries and the bunker environment. They described characteristic signs of prolonged confinement, chronic micronutrient circulation deficits, bone deformities from restricted movement, and recurrent frostbite patterns over multiple years. Crucially, they affirmed these symptoms could not occur in a natural environment with free movement. They required sustained coercive restriction. Next, the forensic team presented the bunker structure assessment, chain placement, room partitioning patterns, fixture arrangement, floor and wall wear levels, all indicative of organized activity, repetitive routines, and continuous operation. They also detailed the matching of mortar and wood traces to tools recovered from the cabin, everything consistent with implements bearing Hemlock's DNA. Following forensics, the behavioral analysis team offered interpretations of why the bunker's structure and operation aligned with an off-grid individual holding extreme territorial ideology and long-term experience in the Teton Mountain environment. They refrained from psychological diagnosis, instead describing behavioral patterns from physical evidence, and when behavioral documents were overlaid with movement history, trail crew employment records, and cabin log notes, the jury observed complete alignment in timing, location, and motive. When presenting the cabin logbook, the prosecution displayed pages recording the 3 victims via symbols, along with cycles of adjustment, separation, and stabilization. Prosecutors stressed that the log was recovered from Hemlock's cabin, handwriting, page organization, and notation style matched other documents found in his residence. The alignment between the log and missing persons timeline, without redundant evidence repetition, was presented in legal structure. Each log timestamp corresponded to an independent medical or forensic event, confirming the same period. This transformed the evidence chain from reliance on a single statement, DNA sample, or item into a convergent system across multiple scientific disciplines. During closing arguments, defense counsel attempted to disconnect the notes, claiming the log was merely personal delusional material unrelated to the victims. The prosecution countered by highlighting perfect matches between seasonal entries, weather descriptions, and actual meteorological data, while emphasizing that if the log were unrelated, why victims' DNA appeared in the cabin and why bunker construction traces matched Hemlock's tools. The combination of pathology, forensics, behavioral analysis, DNA, and timeline left no room for reasonable doubt. In the summation, the prosecutor stressed that the jury's duty was not to judge emotion, but to determine whether the evidence met the beyond a reasonable doubt threshold. The entire record pointed unequivocally to one individual, with no plausible alternative scenario. After 3 days of trial, the jury retired for deliberation. Discussion lasted nearly 8 hours, as they reviewed the legal structure of the indictment, examined each independent evidence group, and assessed any remaining logical gaps. Ultimately, the jury unanimously found all counts proven. Hemlock kidnapped the 3 victims, unlawfully detained them for 6 years, inflicted serious physical and mental harm, and all conduct was organized, premeditated, and continuously sustained. The verdict was announced: Silas Hemlock guilty on all 3 primary counts, paving the way for the federal sentencing phase. The sentencing hearing took place in late December 2021 at the U.S. District Court in Wyoming under heightened security, with attendance by prosecution representatives, defense counsel, the sole surviving victim, Eli Turner, and relatives of Caleb Brandt and Noah Mercer. Before imposing sentence, the federal judge reviewed the entire case record, including the unanimous jury verdict, the 3 primary counts, and aggravating factors demonstrating the brutality, duration, and organized nature of the detention. When given the opportunity for final allocution, Silas Hemlock remained silent, staring straight ahead without expressing remorse or offering further argument. The judge affirmed that the case met the gravest standards of the federal justice system: years-long deprivation of liberty, severe injury infliction, deliberate construction of facilities for confinement, and calculated intent, evidenced by logs, maps, and timelines maintained over many years. Citing relevant provisions of the United States Code on Federal Kidnapping, Unlawful Detention, and Injury During Crime Commission, the judge imposed 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole or commutation, ensuring Hemlock would never be released for the remainder of his life. This sentence reflected the court's view that the crime produced irreversible consequences for the victims and posed an ongoing risk if the defendant were ever freed. After the sentence was read, the judge ordered immediate transfer of the case to concluded status and directed all evidence, transcripts, pathology reports, forensic materials, and investigative documents to federal archives per regulation. Archiving was completed the same day, with all materials sealed under unique identifiers, preserved for potential future retrieval for research or similar case comparison. Meanwhile, the Federal Bureau of Prisons activated high-security inmate classification for exceptionally dangerous offenders. Hemlock was removed from the courtroom via the rear secure corridor and handed directly to the federal transport team. Following mandatory medical checks, drug testing, and risk assessment, the BOP classified him as high-risk, non-release eligible, designated for inmates serving consecutive life terms without parole and posing extreme danger in lower security facilities. Within 48 hours of sentencing, Hemlock was transported by armored vehicle to the Federal Detention Center in Denver for final processing and long-term facility assignment. A 3-member BOP panel subsequently decided to transfer him to ADX Florence, the federal supermax facility in Colorado, housing the most dangerous inmates, ensuring no external contact or interference with surviving victims' recovery. Transfer followed special protocol, 3-layer convoy escort, classified route, and movement timing restricted to internal notification. Upon arrival at ADX Florence, Hemlock was placed in long-term isolation housing, where inmates are allowed out of their cells for a maximum of 1 hour per day under strict supervision. After intake completion, his inmate file was flagged, no transfer, no future facility moves, and no contact prohibited contact with any individual connected to the case. At the same time, the legal case file was marked fully closed and transferred to the Federal Court's Archives Division, concluding the lengthy prosecution process and placing a final period on the justice system's handling of one of the most prolonged and organized detention cases ever documented in the Wyoming mountain region. After the sentence against Silas Hemlock officially took effect and the case file was transferred to federal archives, the focus of the entire support system shifted to the long-term aftermath phase, most heavily centered on the recovery process of Eli Turner, the sole surviving victim. Psychological experts and treating physicians assessed that Eli suffered from multiple layered traumas, post-traumatic stress disorder, prolonged captivity syndrome, sleep disorders, along with hyperreactivity to echoing sounds in enclosed spaces. In addition, physical sequelae such as recurrent frostbite necrosis in the hands, reduced bone density, and ligament damage from years of restricted movement meant that treatment had to follow an extended roadmap, spanning not just months, but many years. Eli was transferred to a specialized intensive rehabilitation facility in Colorado, where psychological treatment, physical therapy, and nutritional monitoring were combined. There, the medical team noted that the recovery process occurred in cycles. Periods of clear improvement were followed by sharp declines whenever memories were triggered by environmental cues such as the smell of damp wood, the sound of dripping water, or darkness. While Eli struggled to regain the ability to reintegrate into society, the families of Caleb Brandt and Noah Mercer continued to face prolonged grief. Even though Hemlock had been convicted, the fact that the two men had still not been found prevented the families from achieving any sense of closure. Each year, on October 3rd, the anniversary of the three men's disappearance, the two families held a small memorial at Jackson Lake Overlook, the place where they first reported the missing persons to a ranger 6 years earlier. Grand Teton National Park assisted by erecting a temporary memorial plaque bearing the names of all three, with the section for Eli noting found alive and those for Caleb and Noah reading still missing. Although the criminal investigation had concluded, small-scale body searches continued each summer when the snow melted and conditions permitted. The case also had a significant impact on the National Park Service's system for managing climbers and hikers. Starting in the summer of 2022, Grand Teton implemented a series of new reforms. All independent climbing groups were required to register more specific routes, provide estimated arrival, departure times for each segment, carry passive locating devices provided free by rangers, and complete mandatory safety briefings before departure. Ranger stations were equipped with short-range ground radar systems to detect unusual digging signs or new surface disturbances, a direct lesson learned from Hemlock's underground bunker, which had existed for years undetected. The park also increased the number of trail cameras placed on less traveled paths to monitor abnormal human activity and deployed a rapid response (CRC) intervention team tasked with immediately investigating any cases of lost contact exceeding 24 hours. In the NPS annual report at the end of 2021, the Teton captivity case was listed as one of the events with the greatest impact on park safety procedures in more than 2 decades, ranking alongside mass fatalities from blizzards and severe avalanche incidents. Media outlets and the climbing community across the United States also recorded a notable shift in risk perception. Rather than focusing solely on natural hazards and terrain, hikers began to recognize that human-caused threats, though rare, could still exist in vast wilderness areas. Many volunteer mountaineering organizations established hike with accountability programs, encouraging groups to share routes with friends, provide real-time location sharing, and maintain controlled communication. Eli Turner's case became a textbook example in national search and rescue training courses on identifying signs of prolonged captivity, analyzing off-grid subject behavior, and locating underground structures in forested areas. The case's influence extended beyond rescue operations and law enforcement into the forensic science community, spawning numerous new studies on assessing cumulative trauma in harsh, natural confinement environments. For park rangers, the incident fundamentally changed their mindset. From prioritizing accident searches, they were compelled to consider human intervention as a possibility in any unusually prolonged disappearance. Ultimately, although Hemlock's sentencing closed the legal chapter, the case continues to live on in Eli's arduous recovery journey, in the unending pain of the two remaining families, and in the fundamental shift in how Americans view safety when entering the wilderness. The case serves as a reminder that mountains and forests, however vast and majestic, are not always innocent, and that vigilance, thorough preparation, and timely response may be the only boundary between safety and tragedy in spaces that seem detached from the human world. The case of Eli Turner and his two fellow climbers was not only a deeply personal tragedy, but also reflected a profound lesson for modern American life, where people increasingly turn to nature to escape urban rhythms, yet often underestimate safety risks related to both the natural environment and human factors. The three amateur mountaineers had followed basic protocols, registering their route, carrying appropriate gear, preparing a 3-day plan, yet they still became targets of an off-grid individual with extremist ideology like Silas Hemlock. This demonstrated that even within the well-managed U.S. national park system, unexpected risks can emerge, particularly from those deliberately avoiding society and forming deviant value systems invisible to the community. Eli's case also served as a reminder that sharing detailed itineraries, maintaining periodic contact, and carrying passive tracking devices are not burdensome formalities but life-saving measures. Had Eli's group been equipped with the mandatory tracking devices now required by the park post case, rangers could have detected the signal interruption within the first 24 hours rather than allowing the situation to drag on for years. A second key lesson came from the investigation team's efforts. Technologies such as LiDAR, DNA analysis, forensics, and behavioral reconstruction helped unravel a seemingly hopeless case. This reinforced the belief that when communities and authorities cooperate transparently, truth hidden deep in the forest for 6 years can still be brought to light. Finally, Eli's story is a reminder of mental resilience. Despite severe trauma, his survival and return became a driving force for nationwide safety improvements. The lesson for every American is to prepare thoroughly when entering nature, trust in science and the legal system, and understand that personal vigilance may be the greatest safeguard in a world where unforeseen risks always exist. Thank you for following the entire story. If you'd like to continue exploring mysterious cases in America's wilderness, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. See you in the next journey, where every small trace can reveal a much larger truth.